and welcome back to Coffee and Grace, your destination for thoughtful connections and brave conversations. I am your host, Dee Kendricks, your grace warrior, your culture strategist, and your key partner. And I am back here with our co-host, Mr. Ossie Kendricks, co-host for the July Love and Marriage series.
Yes, the end.
I know, right? It's so here we are, folks. We're at the end of July. I think it's still going to be July when they see this. I couldn't quite get the dates together. I don't know if it'll
Yes.
be August 1st, but I think it'll be the 31st.
Yep.
So I think we'll be fine. And thank you guys for really supporting this first series within Coffee and Grace. I know we had a week or two off here and there. We had some family matters that we had to tend to. You know how those things happen. Right. But also, we like when you get a chance to miss us just enough, just a little bit. Not enough that you forget us, just to miss us. And we've had fun during
Yes.
this. We've discovered
Yes.
a lot. I think we've gotten some great feedback about the dialogue and particularly about the live stream.
Right.
So the people are clear that they need more live stream from us in the coming future. And I think the coffee table is here for it.
Right. The live stream was fun.
It was.
It was long.
It was. It's
'Cause
funny.
we had a lot to share, but it was fun.
I know. I think when you feel like you're making room for, even if it's in a space where people aren't able to audibly converse with you, I think you consciously lengthen the conversation because you want to give space and room because they are the third co-host.
Sure.
Right? So I think we'll just have to account for that going forward.
Right.
But we'll definitely give you more of that for sure. There's some yummy things coming up for Coffee and Grace that I can't wait to share in the near future. We're probably going to change up just a couple of things, and I'm not completely sure, but after this episode, there might be a longer break than usual between our next episode. We won't end the season, but we might take, what do they normally do to us? We take that intermittent kind of mid-season break, or so this might be our mid-season finale. For a little bit, but you know what is still going to be on?
What's that?
Morning Sip with D.
Morning sip.
That's right. So a reminder, if you are not tuning in, now don't count me out this past week. Well, by the time you see this, I will have been back in action. But listen, I try to be first partaker of my own advice and to know how to make sure you're creating the harmony that your life requires at that moment. And so we took a little bit of break last week that was unscheduled, but most weekday mornings between 8:30 a.m. Central and 10 a.m. Central, I will either be hosting or posting the Morning Sip.
Hosting or posting?
Hosting or posting.
like
We're
it.
either going live or you're going to catch us on the YouTube channel. Either way, even if we're live, they're posted on the YouTube channel. They're just posted a little later. But we have been having a really good time. And let me tell you how the Morning Sip is picking up listen, our crew is growing.
Right.
And somebody asked me the other day, like, what is the Morning Sip about? And I'm just like, you know what? Everybody is on their way to their next. And if they're doing it right, their next is a level up. The Morning Sip is really just a guide, a partnership, and a community that's supporting you on your way to your next level. And what I love most about the Morning Sip is that I'm growing along with it because I have to be first partaker. So don't miss out on that. Join us for the Morning Sip. So for this last episode
Yes.
within the Love and Marriage series, we thought long and hard about what the conversation should be, what the dialogue should be. And eventually we landed on what we think, to be honest with you, isn't discussed very frequently, which tends to be our topic of choice here at the table, by the way.
Right.
We love talking about what nobody's talking
Right.
about out loud, but maybe at their coffee tables. And in relationships, whether it's marriage or cohabitation or just dating, this one topic is prevalent, even if you're not dating, and that is, We all enter some form of relationship with baggage. Baggage, emotional baggage, financial baggage, all the baggages.
Right.
And a lot of times, once we hit a point of the honeymoon phase of any relationship, even friendship, okay, we don't focus on all these bags we brought with us.
Right.
It's like they disappear.
Or where do they go?
Where did they go? And then they just pop up out of nowhere.
Yep.
And in the most inconvenient ways.
Right.
And so we wanted to have this conversation around the topic of where do we put all the baggage? How do we, it's one thing that is inevitable for all of us in the context of any relationship, but in this particular case, we're talking about love and marriage.
Right.
So in all relationships in matters of love and marriage, none of us are avoidable, of facing our own baggage and the baggage of our partner or the person we're loving at the moment.
Yep.
And so instead of us trying to have to be reactive, what would happen if we had a proactive approach? But most folks don't know what that proactive approach is. And so in the most common sense of it, I like to think about it is when you come from any travels,
Right.
the first thing you think about when you get in the house is, where am I going to put the luggage? Where am I going to put the baggage?
Right.
Where am I going to put it so that it's out of the way? Am I ready to unpack it now? Or are you like the Kendrickses and you kind of unpack it over a period of a month, or when the next trip is happening?
Right. Or if someone's coming over.
Somebody's
and we
coming over.
Hide it.
The housekeeper.
Put it in the closet, right?
Right, somewhere. But mostly. So let's dig in. Let's just get straight to it. When we think of baggage in love and marriage, there's so much of it, but what are the common areas in your opinion, do you think, baggage, what kind of baggage do we tend to bring in relationships? Let's start there. And then
Sure.
Let me drink on my new coffee.
I think there's 4. Childhood, past relationships, abuse
Yeah.
that has occurred, whether it was against you or someone around you or close to you. And finance is huge. The finances, I think finances are, and I think all of those traits or all of those incidents can be a part of friendship, relationship, marriage, and finance starts day one. When you first initially want to go out on a date, you get to
Right.
know what that other one's expectations are, and is it McDonald's or is it
Right. The
fine
pasta tree.
dining
The pasta tree.
or mid-level Chili's, my place?
Chili's is not mid-level. Well, I guess it's all relevant.
Relative.
I would rather somebody cook me dinner at home
Mm.
than Chili's for a first date, anyway.
Oh, well, for a first date, yes.
Right.
But you got to throw Chili's in the mix.
You've thrown it in the mix.
Yes.
I mean, it was much later. But you've made me endure. You know what's interesting is I remember when Chili's and Fridays was the thing to do after a movie.
Right.
Oh, you want to go quick crab? And now here I am on my high and mighty 40-something-year-old tout, Chili's.
Right.
With the extra greasy fries and the extra sugary drinks.
Meanwhile, while we were away in Virginia, you had to go to Waffle House.
Let me tell you. So anyone who's grown up and had to literally spend any time on the Mason-Dixon line, okay, you grew up having to connect to the Waffle House. And it is one thing I can't get out of my system. Now I only need one trip per trip. And it can't be too frequent. One Waffle House experience a year is enough for me. and we're so off topic here, but literally, and someone asked me, like, because someone was mentioning Denny's, right? And I was talking about how disgusting Denny's is. And they were like, but you go to the Waffle House? And I was like, here's the thing. I can see their filth. Denny's, it's all happening in back of closed doors. And here's the thing. What Waffle House have you ever gone in, no matter how packed it is, and there's more than 3 people working?
Right.
They can only, listen, they can only be contaminating but so many meals. I'm just saying. I hope none of them try to sue us because of this. But listen, but I don't know why you pretending like you wasn't here for it. You got them extra buttery grits and sopped up that 5,000 sodium milligrams of sausage that they put on my plate.
All right, I'm say I snacked on yours.
You did. So anyway, okay.
About those 4.
About those 4, childhood baggage. So, no, I totally agree. So when we think about finances, childhood, in particular childhood trauma, I think there's baggage from everybody's childhood. Everybody. And, you know, some people have experienced childhood trauma and then abuse and past relationships. Now, the past relationships are an interesting one, and particularly because I think past relationships intertwine with all of the other ones. You know, what kind of financial exchange and understandings were the case in the past relationship, or, you know, and what went down? Were you cheated on? How were you disrespected?
Right.
And so I think it's the most prevalent baggage that tends to show up. I think the financial baggage is the hardest for people to talk about because finances feel so personal, and we don't normalize talking about it. Besides talking about leveling up and getting your credit score, like no one gets online and is like, you know, I don't know what happened, but my credit score hit to about 580 or 600. But you know, I'm working on it. I'm gonna do what I got to do, etc.
Right.
And I think because we don't normalize it, there's a stigma to it. And so people are ashamed if they're not able to say they have in the 700s or 800s, which I do think keeps people in that space. But what happens, I can remember when we were dating, and I don't remember how far into the relationship we were, but it wasn't far when we had this very candid conversation about our credit. And I won't say, we had a conversation with credit before we had a conversation about income. We were dating. I think we may have been 4 dates in. And I remember it feeling so comfortable. And at that point in time, I don't think either one of us were in the best credit state. Mm-hmm. And we both shared that. And I'll never forget how forthright I felt like you were, and how natural the conversation felt, and how there was no judgment on either of our ends. There wasn't there wasn't a part of us that was like, this is okay. Right. Like we should accept this as norm. But what I do think, though, is although we came in with the baggage, our financial baggage of finances from a credit perspective was more so the fact that we were both aware that there was work to be done. Right. And because we unpacked that while we were dating, I think it made us go into marriage thinking about finances in a very different way. Right. Finances have been one of those areas that we don't really fight about. I don't even say that we don't always see eye to eye. I think if a relationship therapist were to explore our financial relationship, they would probably say there's work on both of our ends to figure out how to operate as one. Mm-hmm. But that we grow as one. We make all of our major financial decisions together. I don't know why we're going this way, but maybe somebody needs to hear it. But I also think it makes a difference when you don't grow up watching 2 parents have to do that together. Right. So that gets into childhood baggage, because if you don't have parents, you're not watching as you grow up parents talk about joint bank accounts and mm-hmm. how they figure out that mix. And I don't care how many credit and financial experts are out there, and I love me some Susie Orman and the Credit Repair Girl. It's all great for tips, but it's all very hard to apply in a marriage when you're talking about another human being. Right. And so I think that's interesting, because although I watched 2 grandparents, It was pretty, very high macro level, right? I just knew you worked together as a team. I don't know what that looked like. You know, I never saw my grandmother by the time I was of adolescent age was, you know, retired, but really not retired because she was working in ministry with my grandfather and in these businesses that existed as well. But I never saw her ask for money.
True.
She just always had it. I don't know what that exchange was. I don't know if there was a weekly giving of, I don't know. I never saw her have to say, I need or I want, unless we were out somewhere at a store and it exceeded the cash she had in her wallet, right? And so that's baggage I brought with me,
Okay.
right? I never saw anyone ask a man for money, so I never felt comfortable asking for it.
Sure. Sure. Finances is, I enjoy it because it's always changing.
Yeah.
It's opportunity. I believe that there's nothing that can't be fixed.
That's a good
and
way to look at it. But what, you know, here's the deal. We know that and we believe that. How do we think that shows up, though, when it's not unpacked in the dating space?
I don't understand the question.
Meaning, I think we feel that way about it because we unpacked it. But what happens when it's still baggage that's not unpacked? What happens when people get married and they haven't unpacked their financial baggage and it's just there? How does that show up?
I think it shows up with people in opposition. But I think when you talk about finance and get a sound understanding as to where each other is coming from, it makes matters easier to manage and potentially involve someone else to help. I am always open to whether it's credit counseling. I utilize Credit Karma I take it to heart, and one of my good buddies has told me, like, you shouldn't use Credit Karma. It changes daily. It's a waste of time. He said you're constantly looking at it. I said I get that, but it helps me. It calms me down.
And so maybe I hear you saying that that is a way for someone to individually unpack their stuff so that it doesn't really show up in a negative way in their relationship. Because I think any baggage that you don't tend to builds up in the house of any relationship that exists. And so I often think that couples sometimes struggle to unpack baggage that they individually are struggling to unpack by themselves. And so when we think about what you just said, as far as how do you approach it, that's really your individual approach to making sure, right? Because I do think all baggage has to be, it's a two-pronged approach. The individual has the responsibility of managing it and unpacking their part, and then there has to be some intention. How do we unpack this together? And where do we put it? Because the reality is, contrary to, Hollywood movies and Netflix shows, you don't typically get to unpack and store away in 60 minutes. It's typically unpacked, and then when you unpack it, for some reason, you find out a year later, there's still another bag of it, or there's still another layer of the baggage. So, like, when I think about past relationships, right, and how they can show up, when you and I met, I was on the other side of a divorce, and it shaped me more than my dating relationships. That shaped me around my approach, not necessarily about love, which was interesting, but about marriage and insecurity, and really, I would say making sure, like, my relationship with being comfortable, being open to help And it had nothing to do with the fact that I was a woman of modern day and independent or feminist. Not really. It had everything to do with my experience in my, as I like to call it, starter marriage, was that I was dealing with someone who didn't treat me as an equal. And that, you know, there's a long list of things that went wrong as a result of that. But what it made me leave with was I'll never allow anyone to put me in that position. So here's what I'm going to do to protect myself. And I think that showed up in a number of ways, but mostly when we started cohabitating, because I wanted everything to be 50-50, not because I wanted to make sure you were playing your share, but because I didn't want to be put in a place where it could even become a conversation that I wasn't doing my part. And that was a combination of baggage, right? And so, you know, when we think about past relationship baggage, what are some of the past relationships baggage that you felt like for you kind of came into, that you brought to our relationship, that you had to unpack?
I think when you look at past relationships and what's brought into the new relationship or the next relationship, I've always struggled with wondering how I show up in the new relationship and what I'm bringing from the past relationship, so that baggage, which I think it would probably be the same as the example you just gave relative to wanting to be 50-50, as that was baggage that you brought into from the past relationship. But it doesn't necessarily give you an opportunity to show you how you're showing up unless you have that conversation with your significant other. So I think the challenge there is, the opportunity there is communication about everything, because the baggage comes in different shapes and different opportunities and different times.
It does.
And being not so, I don't think you can prepare for it. I think it happens.
I don't think you can prepare for it. I do think that you have to be intentional at some point in establishing, how will I prepare for the unexpected? Because I don't think you can prepare for how it's going to show up, because I don't think we know.
Right.
Unless you're a person where it's a pattern, which, let's be honest, right? If we all talk to our exes, they probably have some similarities of themes about what they didn't like about us.
Sure.
Right? Because there was unpacked baggage along the way, or packed, non-unpacked, right? That said, some of it is because, I love that you said communication, because sometimes that is the only way that we know how it's showing up. And I think, though, I think the challenge that people run into is humans aren't always ready to hear that story, right?
Of course.
Especially if it's been around stuff that they haven't started to unpack, or they tried to unpack and it was a brutal experience, because that's
Right.
the piece that doesn't get talked about. People often assume that people who respond to things in a very defensive manner, it's like you haven't dealt with your stuff. Well, sometimes it's that they tried to deal with it and they didn't have the right resources, or they hit that surface level, which is the most painful level, and it scared the hell out of them.
And that stuff can date back to childhood.
I mean, hello? Yes.
It could involve what you observed in the relationships that were in your house when you were young.
You know, it's so interesting. Something comes to mind, which will probably be a controversial thing to say, but I'm going to say it because I mean it in love, and I know it's, you know, I try my hardest to be real on here. And so it's something that came up really real for me. I can remember us having some conversations recently about some, actually, where we would end up in a difference of opinion in state, around how there are moments where I feel like I'm defending myself and you kind of move into protective mode. And we have a disconnect in that moment. The details aren't important, right? But all we know is we've had enough communication through the discomfort to know there's a disconnect there. And we're getting underneath the why and the how, but it's a journey that we'll fix to it. But I think we're both aware of it now. Well, it connects for me for baggage because I can remember literally crying at one point. We were on the other end of, we had had an experience the night before, and the next morning, you were moved on, and which actually was interesting because I'm normally the one who moves on faster. The Sagittarius in me just gets my stuff out and then move on, and normally my Pisces has to process. Well, this morning I was the one sulking.
It only takes me a day.
I
It
can give
takes
you
me
that.
24 hours.
I will give you that. But the Sagittarius in me is like, after I done flipped off a whole grid, 10 minutes later, we still mad. But anyway, so the next morning, you had leaned in and was like, hey, what's wrong? And I remember I just bust out crying. And what happened is, for me, I had started connecting the dots because for me, I was bothered that it bothered me so much. And I didn't know why. And what surfaced to me was, I said, every important relationship in my life, including my childhood, the moment I began to speak my truth, I was silenced. And I was told that I shouldn't, as I can get emotional now. Clearly, it's baggage that still needs to be dealt with, which is why I see Shelly every week. So, and, and this is no dispute against my family or what have you. Listen, families do the best they can, right? I've come to the conclusion that every parent would traumatize their child and such and such. But, especially in the era that we grew up, I think we were the last era of speak when spoken to.
Right.
And I can imagine, I spent a lot of time with my grandparents, right? So here they are coming from 30, they were born in the 30s. And here I am 2 generations later with all of my precocious questions and the first generation of responding to no with why. Or coming back later. I can remember coming to my grandmother one time after she had disciplined me about something and telling her, I just want you to know that you hurt my feelings. And I can remember her trying to process, like, do I knock her across this room? Do I process with her? What, and I could see her struggling with her generational experience. And, but go forward, even past that, it was the same in marriage and at work. That when there was this connection to me speaking my truth with being silenced in a way that made me feel like how I felt wasn't of value. Now, here's the thing. The baggage there was, it's showing up in this relationship. I may still disagree with how you approach it. The baggage keeps us from being able to discuss it civilly, right? The baggage is really what got in the way because you probably have your own reasons for why you approach it the way you approach it, right? You go into protection mode and you're probably thinking and seeing the worst that can happen, right? Because you've seen the worst that can happen. And so I think, as we talk about this, I keep coming back to your point of communication and how important that, it's almost like communication is the vehicle to understanding where the baggage can go. It's like it's the entrance to starting to unpack it. I know that was a really long monologue.
No, but I get it. And I just had an aha moment. So I grew up, spent a lot of time with my grandmother, and she was quiet to be around. She was just a doer. She didn't say much. She was congenial, and everybody loved her. But when she was at home with us, she was quiet and just working. And so I see a lot of myself as that, quiet and just working. I'm a doer. I just do it. I don't ask. Sometimes I don't ask for feedback, for input, from whether it's in this relationship and also in my work relationships. And so that's the I guess that's the baggage that I bring to the table, is that I am a doer, and oftentimes I don't need to involve anyone's input because I know I'm going to do this right and get it done and move on, which that's baggage.
It is
Good and
baggage.
bad.
Right. Because that's the thing, is that some of this baggage that comes is not toxic. It's only toxic when undealt with.
Right.
Right?
Right.
That's when it begins to poison
Right.
the relationships. And especially when we think and get into some of the other areas you talked about, like abuse,
Right.
and some of the fact that some people haven't dealt with that. I remember when we had Dr. Knox on the show, and it talked about how adults who experience childhood abuse, who don't deal with it, typically in their adulthood and late adolescence start engaging in risky behaviors and self-sabotaging behaviors, because that's the way that they kind of self-soothe and deal with those. And so can you imagine how many divorces, how many adultery experiences, and how many emotional abusive scenarios are really because the baggage from childhood and experiences sat so long that it spoiled and became toxic.
Right.
Because that's
Right.
what happens when you leave anything untouched too long. And I think, we wanted to talk about it because it exists for all of us, but in particular for folks who are getting into relationships. And especially depending on your age group, there's a couple of generations amongst us that were like us who think that they have figured it all out.
Oh yeah.
And honey, you can't tell them after their, premarital sessions and their 5 or 12 books, especially I'm talking to the ladies. I don't care how many books you buy on marriage. I don't care how many Stormy O'Martian praying wife books you bought. I don't care. And here's the thing, all of that is good because education is food for the soul and really sows a seed of wisdom for later.
Yep.
But let me tell you that it doesn't prepare you and is no escape of doing the handy work and the on-the-job, real-time work of managing baggage. And so as we move to shift to like a close, I think the real outcome I wanted for this dialogue is folks to, number one, not feel bad about the baggage, but really have a plan to be on the proactive versus the reactive.
Right. Right.
And so how do folks do that? I heard you already say a number of things around, from a financial perspective, things that you do. And I think what I see in a theme of what you said is a couple of things. One, that you first have to deal with your baggage independently.
Yeah.
And so be clear about what you can do independently, but also communication is key. Communication is literally like the kryptonite to toxicity in the relationship. Toxicity is really hard to exist when healthy communication is on the table.
Right. Agreed. So recognizing it for yourself,
Yes.
and being open to sharing, even if it's about you,
And hard.
because it's only if you're showing up to yourself this way, you're showing up to the significant other twice fold.
That part. Like my
and
grandma
that-
used to say, she was like, if you can smell yourself, trust and know that the people on the other side of that odor smell it twice.
Exactly. But then there's also giving patience and being patient.
Yeah.
And
And
being
gracious.
patient and giving grace, I
Yes.
should say. Thus the theme, Coffee and Grace.
I
the
mean,
name.
this is why we're here.
Giving grace.
That part.
And we talked about seeking outside help.
Listen,
Nothing's wrong with going to a therapist and letting it all out.
and doing it in 2 lanes, because I think that's the other thing. So as you do move into, and we're not saying we're relationship or marriage experts here.
No, not at all.
Okay, we are infants in marriage, but what we
Yes.
are is committed to growing in this journey and bringing others along and creating a conversation forum for easy learning so that people don't have to dig hard to find the answers. And so
Right.
here's what we've learned, and here's what we've learned from others that we talk to, because we're super fortunate where both of us are surrounded by people who have been married a really long time. We're surrounded by some great marriages and some not so great marriages, right? I mean, that's the real truth. Some of them work, some of them don't.
Right.
But there are lessons from them all, because I believe that all of the people we're surrounded by are good people and dealing with human matters, right?
Right.
And so you have to deal with your baggage individually with some type of psychological expert. This is a fact. I mean, science says you can't tend to every part of the body except the part that controls everything. But the other piece is also going as a couple. And here's a news flash. I want to tell y'all a secret. You don't have to wait until you're married to go to couples counseling. Like, believe it or not. And you don't have to just go to your pastor. I think pastors are, depending on their expertise, because some pastors are licensed counselors and therapists and psychologists. Like, think about Pastor Cal from Married at First Sight.
Yeah.
He doubles. But if that's not your pastor's expertise, I think that it's great supplement, right? But, you know, I think about something my therapist said maybe a few weeks ago to me. She said 75% of marriages that end up in counseling end in divorce. And I was like, oh, well, that's not going to make me want to go. And she said, I don't say that to scare you. I say that actually as a compliment. She said, because 90% of those marriages chose therapy as the last option.
Sure,
And by the time
sure.
they got there, it was supposed to be the Hail Mary, instead of approaching it as a plan to thrive in relationships. And so, you know, when you think about even employment, there's some kind of continuous learning in every professional expertise.
Right.
Do they think that you're any dumber than you were the year before? No. Howsoever, there's enough that they need to ensure that you revisit, that you sharpen. And so I think creating intentional plan for where are we going to put the baggage is critical, because you're never going to see it coming.
Right.
And if you don't have a plan for it, it's hard. The other area I think is super cool to apply and try is like marital support groups and who you're around as for married couples, and not just hanging out, but how do you all create intentional space to talk about love and marriage?
Right.
How do you
Right.
all ensure, right? And you and I were having this conversation that it's hard when you get married in your 40s.
Yeah.
You already have your friends. I have my friends. We have some joint friends who are couples. And it's hard. You literally have to figure out how will you intentionally create not only new dynamics and relationships to feed your marriage, but how will you, even amongst the couples that are there, create intentional space to talk about marriage?
Exactly. Because I know the more mature I get, Team No Friends just resonates.
You mean no
I'm-
new friends?
No new friends. Just
you
resonates.
love
I am
your
comfortable having some alone time, and also having some time with you.
Yeah.
And having some time with the friend base that we have.
Yeah.
And a lot of times those friends, family, I should say.
For sure. For sure. I think a lot of our base is family. And I mean, actually, I walk away with a little bit of a homework assignment for us, because as I sat here and I think about all of the marriages we're surrounded by, I can't think of one time we all intentionally connected in the name of sharing and building each other up as couples. And that's on all of us, right? But that's part of the journey, because those, you know, one might say, and I'll say this in close, one might say, what does that have to do with unpacking the baggage? You know, there is safety in numbers. There's safety in the Me Too factor, not the one that made it public, not that kind, the other one that existed before that.
Sure.
The power of knowing that someone else, it's like we talked about with loss, that someone else feels what you feel and you're not crazy.
Right.
The amount of power it has against shame and silence is sobering. And shame and silence are typically what keep us from sharing with our spouse and sharing with others who can help us. And so once that's kind of dispelled, it's almost like the credit thing that we talked about. Like, you said yours, I said mine, and here we were. Like, yeah, I got to get this shit together. But can I have another drink and some fries? You know, and then I remember as a result, it always became easy dialogue for us, which is why I think we're, you know, when we share the highs and the lows, none of us came to each other shamed about anything. I was harder for me, but I think creating numbers and safety and spaces of accountability to each other, going back to those vows that were made on the wedding day, that your wedding guests made to you, not that you made to them, to say, we will help this couple make it until death do them part. We have to remember that. And for the ones who weren't there on your wedding day, when they decide to join your village, that's what they decide to join. Well, believe it or not, time is up.
Yeah, time is up, and you know we should connect with our bridal party and have a tune-up.
We should. Just the married ones, because half of them wasn't
No,
married.
we got it.
With all of them?
And then
They did
there's
vow. They all vowed.
with
to
the
help
bridal
us.
party
They did. They vowed.
with everybody.
With everybody.
All of
You
them.
know, but see, the problem is when I see the bridal party, all I want to do is hang with my girls. and then I forget that there's the other dynamic base. But we should make an intentional, because here's the thing, everyone in the bridal party exists in the space of love and marriage,
Yep.
right? And they're all on different journeys, right? And so it'll be interesting to even have that conversation, but also have this very real conversation
Right.
about love and marriage with our bridal party.
And just where we're at.
Where
just
we're
to
at.
check in.
Yeah, where we're
tune
at.
up.
Tune up. And it's probably time for us to start our next cycle of couples counseling,
Yes.
because I love a car that runs well and smooth. And to have the pride and joy of going into couples counseling saying, we're doing amazing. How do we keep that up?
Right.
How do we keep that up? Here's what comes up for us now. All right.
There we go.
So with that, bam. That is your love and marriage finale to the season. So we've got something special coming up about the love and marriage segment. I think you're going to be excited about. But more news on that to come. I don't have a last sip because this was a sip enough, right? Again, you're probably going to have a little bit of a break from us, but fret not. We'll be back before you know it. And we are just so thankful for this community. We're thankful for the folks who are finding, and the tribe who is finding the coffee table because you belong here.
Right.
And I can't wait to figure out how we get to hear your voices more. So stay tuned on that. And as you know, I always want you to be bold, be authentic, and most importantly, be gracious. Thanks for tuning in, folks. Thank you for joining the conversation. It was such a privilege to have you. We hope that you would keep joining the conversations. Meet us over at our social media, where there's always a coffee and grace conversation happening.